My goodness. Hello and happy Sunday. I am so grateful to have you here joining us at the Church of, and it's another glorious day, another glorious week, and I am excited about sharing the things that are on my heart today. Stretching, expanding, encouraging, enlightening, lifting, challenging, provoking, not only who are listening, but which I'm assuming we got sight and sound. I guess I'll let them. Okay, good. We're good to go. But all of us, right? Stretching. I feel like that's part of the Christ journey. The idea of being stretched beyond, right? A subsequent gaze, right? You look and you look again, and then you look again, and then you look again. Um, and the page refreshes, and I'm so glad to be sharing this journey out of my own journey, right? I always thought that that's the best kind of preaching, right? When the preacher doesn't tell you, what all's wrong with you, but the preacher shares her own journey, right? His own journey. They or she share their own journey and just pour out of their, as they used to say, online real-time relationship with God. And my spiritual grandfather would say often, he would say, you know how this works, right? God gets on me and I get on you. So that's what it is. And as God challenges and stretches me, I bring that stretching forward. And if you're a first timer, which every single week we have new people request, hey, I'd like to check out the Church of. Welcome. We are a church, legit a church. And I'm so glad to welcome you to our church today. Somebody say, well, there's no building. I mean, there's no doors, there's no steeple, there's just people. And that's really what it is. We are a church, what I call, if the fine folks at Disney wouldn't get me for it, I'd call it the experimental prototype church of today and maybe of tomorrow. But I don't want to be like Dippin' Dots, the church of the future, right? I just simply believe when you have a revelation of Christ that is non-weaponized, right? What do I mean by weaponized? We're on the right team. Everybody else is on the wrong team. And unless they get on the right team or until they get on the right team, God is against them, and I'm supposed to be against them too. That's an antichrist idea of God. Once you move to centering the person of Christ and see everything through the prism of that person and watch how your view changes, you move out of that. And now we're not in church in a subservice role to the mission. We are the mission. And the mission of the Church of is simply to empower you to live. That's what we do on the teaching. And then to empower you to love, and simply saying all that you would put into the building, all that you would put into, you got a musical gift. So I play music and I want to do, listen, there are nursing homes all over that would love for you to play. There are community groups that would love to have a teacher. There are choruses that would love to go out and encourage and minister in song. But we don't need all of our energy consumed on the overhead of the beast, the overhead of the building. We want all those resources, all those finances, all that energy going out to train you to see people and impact people. And we hear from you weekly. Thank you for sharing. It's not bragging when you call us or you write us or you send us an email or, we talk to you and you say, listen, I know I normally wouldn't share this, but I want to tell you what happened. And we hear the testimonies of how you're not changing lives through an institution, but you're changing lives and impacting destinies face to face. We love to hear about that and just the things you're doing out in the community. You're building community out among the people because when you don't have a weaponized idea of Christ, we don't need to huddle together in our room and boy, we're so persecuted and it's just so good to be with people who, know that we're on the right team and see everybody else on the wrong team. No, we're out here with the Omega view, right? With the larger view. Seeing people as Jesus see. And I want to raise up, my God, Connie and I have a dream to raise up 1 million people living just like Jesus, an ongoing embodiment of God. Acts 10:38. It's become so important to me. Every time somebody tells me, hey, pastor, or, Connie and I say we're grand pastors, right? We're not pastors like parents, we're all high strung and everything. We're grand pastors, which is just whatever, man. It's all good. We know God's got you and you'll get there eventually. You'll be fine. We love you no matter what. But when people tell me, I was out at the concert and this happened, or I was out in my driveway and this happened, or I was walking in the store and this happened, or there's a person in my neighborhood, or I just went down to, when they're out there, I hear this in my head. I hear Acts 10:38, how God anointed Jesus of Nazareth, who went about doing good and healing all who were harassed by the dark powers, harassed by the powers of darkness. And that's what I think about. I think about all of you, so several hundred now in our church, active in our church, coming up maybe a couple hundred active in our church, who are saying, look, I'm getting value out of the messages, and I'm showing that value through supporting you and Connie. It's changing my life, and I'm committed to going out and changing the world around me. And I hear about that. I think, man, that's 150, 200 people going out doing good. Can we turn that into 1 million people who every week and they hear the word that they would hear on a Sunday morning, or wherever you're watching or listening this week? This is our message for June 23rd. But wherever you're hearing it, whenever you're hearing it, you're waking up every day and saying, God, how can I see and encounter and empathize and sympathize and ease and eliminate and alleviate and prevent suffering in this world? You're going about doing good and pushing back on the chaos of this world. And oh man, I just dream of 1 million people coming in, letting Connie and I stir you up, preach this to you, stretch your understanding, your view of God, and then sending you forth. And I'm thrilled at the possibility of what that might look like. So welcome if you're a first-timer. Welcome. This is our 8th week, brand new church, and so many of you are starting to catch the vision the first couple weeks, like, what is this? But now you're starting to see it. You're starting to see it, and that's good news. That makes my heart smile. Today we are continuing in our series, and it's just been powerful so far. And the great news about this is I am hearing and seeing the testimony of your enlightening and being pushed and nudged. We talked about the first week on why people stop going to church, and then we spent 3 weeks just dealing with women and girls and moms and daughters and centering the reality of what that world and the inequity of what that world looks like. And some people say, well, that's difficult on me. And we started out the first Sunday of June 2nd there, the message of June 2nd, just dealing with LGBTQ and as friends and family. But we're talking about something deeper than that. Somebody said, well, why would you talk about that for 3 weeks? Why would you talk about that? Because the blindness regarding that is deeply entrenched in the Christian soul. Remember, I told you, I'm not only preaching to you, I'm preaching to my old self, right? I'm preaching to people who came up like I came up, who have been taught what I have been taught, and the testimonies. When you tell me, when I hear you and talk to you or hear from you and get a message and hear from you weeping, I hear from friends and family of LGBTQ people saying, man, I had some dark spots in my heart. I hear from people saying, you don't even know the words that I was told when I was growing up about LGBTQ people and what my family told me and what I passed on to my own children. And I realize I've perpetuated that darkness. Or people, LGBTQ people, right? And say, I've been conditioned with such self-hatred. I spend half my time justifying my existence as an LGBT person, and the other half of my time condemning my existence as an. So it's working. The seed of that is working. And here is the point, and now we'll start here. I am Michael T. Smith. I am the pastor of the Church of, and this is your message for June 23rd, 2024. This is the message for the week. So here is what's really going on, that just like a story, that what happens in a movie is not what the movie's about. What happens in a children's book is not what the book is about, right? In the children's book, the guy could not eat them in the dark. He could not eat them in a park. I know it wasn't a park. He could not eat them here. I do not like green eggs and ham. Well, what happens in the story? Well, a guy wanted a guy to try some green eggs and ham, and he didn't want to do it. Well, that's what happens, but that's not what the story's about, right? The king stilts. That's what happens, but that's not what that story is about. And here, what we've been preaching regarding LGBTQIA friends and family, what we've been preaching regarding this, what we've been saying is part of the story, but what it's about is not about them. It's not about the theyness or the otherness. It's about a we-ness. It's about an usness. It's about a universal reality of what it means to be human. And you see now here, we'll get into it. We left off last week with this idea here, that this, and notice this, I'm not using here the word sexual, right? I'm just talking about not the sexual self-concept at this point, but our general self-concept. Please hear me. This is for all people. This is for hetero, right? This is for homo relations, right? This is for, LGBT, all the way across. Every single one of us, right, functions like this. And we function like this, not in a sexual context. This is not a triangle of a sexual truth, as somebody trying to screenshot it here or whatever. This is our entire self-concept, how you see yourself in the world. That's the self-concept part. This is how you see yourself. And then how that seeing of yourself drives the way you express yourself. This is has nothing to do with gay or straight. It's a everything problem. It has nothing to do with sex, although it has to do with gay and straight. It has to do with sex. It has to do with non-sex. It's about our entire personhood, that all of us are shaped the way we see ourselves and the way we interact with the world and express ourselves are driven by these things. And so these are the things that we've been talking about. So up here first, right? The biology, right? Who we are, how we see ourselves is driven by our biology, by our brain, by our body, by our genetics. The second thing is how we see ourselves and how we express ourselves is driven by culture. It's driven by messaging, the messaging we receive about who we are in the world and our place in the world, who people like us are in the world, who people like us are in the sight of God and not. Are we the chosen? Well, every tribe and every religion, every nation believes they're the chosen, and out of that false idea of saying we're the chosen, and we're hopefully our next series we're going to be dealing with cults and cultism, but we'll see where that goes. But the messaging about who we are and who they are, our self-concept and how we express that, driven by culture. And then finally here, down at the bottom, who we are, our self-concept, how we express, is driven by our environment, which is a combination of exposure and experience. Our environment, the things we were exposed to in life, and the experiences we had in life. And this is how you are made up. You are made up of these things. Now, consider, if you would, maybe I can get a better, more call-out color here. Let's see. I got a lot of colors here. All right, I'll just go back to where I was. So I want you to think about this. All of these things, two things about them. Number one, nothing here on this chart, not the biology, not the culture, not the environment, none of this is static. None of this, we'd like to think it's unchanging, right? That things are, we would specifically like to pretend that the biology is unchanging, but the biology changes, right? Biology changes over time. Our brain, our body, even the effects of our genetics become clearer over time. And especially as you age, how often do we age and do we feel like, oh my gosh, I just did that like my grandpa. I just crossed my legs like my dad. I just raised my voice like my mom. I just reminded me of my grandma. And we start to see these genetic things over time. Or, somebody say, boy, when you turn your head that kind of way, you look like Uncle so-and-so or Aunt so-and-so. Or, your grandma was good at that. Or your mom was good at that. Your dad had a music and just things you didn't even know about it. What? Because the genetics, they are strong. And so these things here now, the biology, it exists. If you make note in the triangle, it's, good Lord, it's inside us. It's the part of our self-concept that's internal. The messaging, right, is the part of us that's external. But the experience and exposure, our environment, are both external, internal, right? So it's the things happening around us that we're exposed to, the things we experience that are outside of us, but they actually take up a life-building block element of our very creation, right? So the messaging is kind of the true external that of the things we're being told, of the things we're being told of who we are, the things we're being told about what we do, the things we're being told about what we like, who we associate with. That's external. But the things we go through, the things we're exposed to, well, they start out outside of us, but they eventually take place as part of our story, right? They get written on the journal of our souls. They get written on the journal of our hearts, and they have said, and I, in utero, they say that children are aware of their environment at about 6 months in the womb, that the things that are happening outside the womb are actually able to affect a child inside the womb, and then of course you get into epigenetics and things like that. We won't get too much into that, but the idea of that what's happening externally can set up and have a place in us internally, and that's who you are. I mean, just pretend we're not talking about LGBTQ. Pretend we're not talking about hetero. Pretend we're not talking about sex at all. Just we're talking about the human experience. How you arrived at the you of today, the week of June 23rd, 2024. It is right here on your screen. There are biological factors. There are cultural factors. There are environmental factors, and these have shaped the shape of you. And you have your internal self-concept, right? You have how you see yourself here, and that may or may not be how you express yourself. As a matter of fact, sometimes we express ourselves in ways to hide the way we think of ourselves. We overcompensate, we undercompensate, we put ourselves forth, we pull ourselves back, all in a different way to sometimes separate how we're seen in the world from how we see ourselves. And all of this is conditioning, and all of this becomes a part of who we are. So in your notes, think about this now. Catch this. This triangle, right? The biology, the brain, the body, the genetics, the cultural, the messaging, the environment, the exposure, and the experience. All these things shape our yearnings. They shape our inclinations. They shape our practice. We are not generally a seafood family in our house. There's a long story there, and somebody said, well, you just never had good seafood. Well, I've had some of the best seafood. I was told some of the best. You just got to try this. You just got to try this. You just got to try this. And I tried it, and it failed me. It failed me miserably. And there are some genetic things. My mom was allergic to iodine and things like that, but I don't even think my thing is an allergy thing. It's just I had 2 bad experiences, and then I said, this is ridiculous. I'm going to have this is ridiculous. I just can't cut off a whole section of every menu of every restaurant because of my 2 bad experiences. And I had a third experience where I saw the Virgin Mary, Tupac, the Prophet Muhammad, and Elvis in one vision as things were being exorcised out of my body. And I just said, I'm never again. And guess what? I'm 50. Yes, it's not too old to try new things, but it's also too old to say, well, you should just give it a shot. I've moved on. So guess what? Because I'm not a seafood family, and we tell my kids, and Mikey's ordered food, and Olivia's ordered food, and shrimp, and this and that, and that's fine, whatever they want to do. And some they like, and some they don't like. I mean, that's fine like that. But it shapes our inclinations, where we come from, what we're exposed to, what we're around, our environment shaping our inclinations, shaping our yearnings, shaping our practice. This is a big thing, and really kind of the giant thing that we're trying to get over here on your screen here is this. These 3 things, they really shape our yeses and our no. Our yes and our no are shaped from, it's Connie connecting to the iPad again, our yes and our no comes out of this. The things we say yes to, the things we say no to, the things that we find appealing, the things that we find repulsive, they come out of this. And hear me now, just because this is the sum total of who we are does not mean Christ does not want to call us into a Christ-aligned version of who we are. That's really what it is. That this is who we are currently, but guess what? There's also other factors. The Spirit of Christ working in us, moving us to a new self-concept. The truth of the Word of Christ working outside us, moving us toward a new concept. The experience that we have with mystical encounters, the presence of God, the experience we have, the exposure that we have to new environments, to new role models, to new versions of normal. All of these things shape who we are. And again, in your notes, none of them are entirely static. The messaging, the messaging about sex and sexuality, the messaging about marriage, the messaging about that. And somebody said, well, that's why I stick to that old-time religion. Well, my question there would be which one? Number one, you don't stick to that too old-time religion because you kind of you live in a heresy of the old-time religion. You live in a version of the old-time religion that is a rejection of the old-time religion, and at the one time is a heretical manipulation of the old-time religion. But we all live in our selective version of religion. But none of these are entirely static. And catch this on your screen here. See if I can get rid of some of my jumbled notes here. Let's go back this way. None of these are entirely static. And guess what? None of these are deterministic. Entirely, right? I'm not saying here you are who you are and you're just being carried down a a free-flowing waterfall or free-flowing river to go over the falls, and you have no say in the matter at all. No, these are the factors of yourself, but catch this, your self is inside here. And there's always a larger I inside you, right? When Paul would say, the things that I do, I don't want to do. I hate the things I want to do, I don't want to do. Who are these I's you're talking about? Well, we have our larger self and our smaller self. And our here's the thing now, our large self, see if I can catch this, our large self, on your screen, I hope you're catching this, our large self has been made in the image of God, right? Our large self, what we would sometimes call our spirit, I would say this, is image seated. Our large self is image seated. We've been made in the image and likeness of God. We are the offspring of the Father, the Greek poet said. We are the offspring of God, right? We are made, that's our large self. Our large self is image seated. But we also have our small self. And our small self is chaos conditioned. Chaos conditioned, which is what? In the falling dominoes of chaos, we take these image-seated beings, put them into this biological, genetic, brain and body, messaging, culture, environment, exposure, experience thing, and now we get this image-seated self gets jostled and bumped and bruised and manipulated and sometimes inspired and sometimes dehumanized and all these different things, and that chaos conditioned self now existing side by side with our large self. So our large self, which is what God calls higher and what Christ pushes us toward, in contention with our small self, which leans towards the perpetuation of chaos. Our small self is an heir of chaos and a ongoing progenitor of chaos. We have inherited a world of chaos, and we passed it on through our body, through our environment, through our complicity, through our silence, through our own the brutality of our own self-will against us and other people. We pass it on, and so we are heirs and perpetuators of this chaos. And Christ speaks to us. Christ challenges us from the large self, but Christ does so completely sympathetic to the reality of the small chaos conditioned self. So you think of the woman in adultery. Think of this, right? What does he say? He says, I don't condemn you. I know your religious background. I know your religious leaders. They are the one authorizing your execution for this very human, frail thing that you've done. He says, I see there's a lot of story here. I'm wondering where the guy is. I don't know how this got here. I wonder why you were selected out. I'm interested to see all of these lustful guys who are probably aroused at the very thought of catching you in bed and dragging you in here. They're sitting here operating in lust, wanting to cast stones at you, and I see their hypocrisy, because if they were really living by that old-time religion that they say, they would realize how they themselves are condemned by that same old-time religion. But he says to her, he says, I don't condemn you. Why? In recognition and sympathy of the small self. But he also says, go and sin no more. Why? Out of recognition and empowerment of the large self. Because he knows who we are chaos conditioned, he says, I don't condemn you. Because he knows who we are image seated, he says, I provoke you and challenge you and push you to live consistent with your large self. Are you catching me, what I'm saying to you? I hope you're still out there. Again, I can't see you. I can't hear you. I don't even know that you're there. All I know is when Connie's AirPods are on or off the iPad. I kid, of course. So the triangle of expression is not entirely in your notes. It's not static. Sexual expression, right? Not static, not entirely deterministic. And on this board here, let's see if I can go back. I mean, I've really done a number here. On this idea, I want you to catch three things. There are changes going on, new inputs going on three levels. On the macro level, that's big, right? That's the macro, the big level, right? There are changes and shifts going on the micro level, right? The macro and the micro. Guess what? There are changes and shifts going on the nano level. We're talking about tiny, 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 almost imperceptible inputs going into shifts and changes and factors affecting our biology, hormones and external things, and caffeine and dopamine and stimulants and stuff in the water and stuff in the plastic and stuff in this and stuff in the cows and stuff shaping our this and our biological development, who we are, where we are, and all that kind of stuff. And we've got the micro, macro, and nano shifts going on in culture. And again, that's a micro culture. So it's the macro culture, what's going on in the large world. It's the micro culture, what's going on inside your house, how you were raised or in your community. And it's the nano culture. You can be one of 5 children in the same house, living in the same macro culture, city, state, and country, nation, community. You can be in a micro culture of 5 children in a house raised by 2 parents, getting the same micro messaging, but you could be off reading something online giving you nano messaging that's shaping you in a way that's not shaping your other siblings or not shaping those in your larger community. These are a factor. And of course, in our environment, right, oh, sorry. Oh, my gosh. Thank you. Sorry, I'm sitting there talking. So we have the micro, the macro, and the nano, right? And those things are affecting the biology. Thank you. Those things are affecting the culture. And those micro, macro, and nano experience and exposures are going on inside our lives. And this is ongoing. And these are micro inputs, nano inputs, macro inputs, micro adaptations, nano adaptations, who are shaping who we are. Okay, now let's move on here and get into what we want to get. I hope you're catching it. Somebody said, well, are you talking about LGBTQ or not? Yes. Are you talking about gay people, straight people? Yes. Are you talking about in a sexual context or a not sexual context? Yes. I'm saying this is how we arrived at our chaos conditioned selves, and yet we are image-seated people who long for dignity, who long for wholeness, who long for personhood, who are hardwired in the image of love. That's who we are, set down in this jostled chaos thing. And that conflict is really the heart of what we're talking about. I've used this example before, and you've heard about Caitlyn Jenner, no doubt, who the world for a long time knew as one person, and then some people feel like, well, all of a sudden it was someone else. And there's a very familiar thing where Caitlyn Jenner is kind of around a fire pit or doing something that she posted on social media. She said, just hanging out. She said, it was just us girls, Caitlyn and some of her female friends, and just us girls. And I remember a commentary on that, and this goes back to the series that we taught at the beginning on women, girls, moms, and daughters. But I remember a woman saying, she said, I see that and I appreciate that, and good for Caitlyn and good for whatever. I'm not against anybody, but be careful saying you know what it's like to be a woman because you've undergone this transformation, right? Be careful saying you understand what that's like, because being whoever you were or whoever was in the former life, this prize strong athlete, what people say, you're a man, right? That's how the world saw you. The world did not see you as a girl. And all what's the commentary? The macro, micro, and nano inputs growing up as a little girl at age 1, 2, 3, 4, 20, 30, 40, 50 are different micro, macro, and nano inputs growing than growing up as a male, right? They're different. And those, they affect the biology. They affect the brain and the body. They affect the genetics, the epigenetics, the internal and the external. They affect the environment and exposure. And again, we can talk about the science or pseudoscience of epigenetics, but even if it's one generation, even if it's just a combination of biology reacting to environment exposure, we'll just call it that. But what someone who the world would look and say, that's a female, right? And say, well, that's a woman right there. That's a girl right there. There are different micro, macro, and nano inputs. But the same is also true for someone who grows up and says, I have lived in conflict in my life. A trans person, Bruce Jenner, saying, okay, I know what you saw, but there was a detachment between who I was externally and how I saw myself internally. So what are we saying? We're not depriving that person of nuance. We're not depriving that person of full personhood. Why? Because we're admitting that it must also be a whole different set of micro, macro, and nano interactions between brain biology and messaging and experience and exposure that would shape the trans mind. So are we talking about hetero or not? Yes. Are we talking about man or woman? Yes. Are we talking about trans and yes. Are we talking about sexual and non-sexual? Yes. We're talking about how we see ourselves in the world, how that drives expression. But the church historically has majored on the the doctrinal violence, rhetorical violence, and actual violence against LGBTQ persons. And I can tell, first of all, by the stubbornness in my own heart, which I shared about my own journey last week in this area, but I can also tell among the reaction of our church that this has hit people and it's been more of a struggle than others, because people say, it's like I remember this comedian I heard, and he was talking about, I don't know if it was a comedian, it might have been a pastor, often the same thing, but he said he was talking about this preacher they were trying to get the building fund together, and he was, up and he was closing, he was trying to take up the offering for the building fund, and he said, when this church we first started, we were just a little baby church, and all we could do is crawl, and the person in the back said, crawl, brother, crawl, and he says, then we started getting members, we got in our first little building, and man, this church is ready to walk, and the guy says, walk, brother, walk, and he says, now church, I'm telling you, if we're ever going to get this new property, it's time to give, and the guy says, crawl, brother, crawl. I mean, that's kind of a thing, and so, I'm up preaching and say, well, this is why we stopped going to church, and like, amen, amen, and this is how we got to treat men, women, men, girls, moms, and daughters, amen, amen, and now let's talk about LGBTQ, crawl, brother, crawl. I mean, it's hitting people in different ways, and that's okay, right? Because we're going to hop up on the potter's wheel. We're going to break through that messaging. We're going to break through that chaos conditioning. We're going to break through our own, experiences and repulsions, and stop filtering the world through our brain biology and genetics and saying, well, surely everybody sees it the same way. We're going to let that deep work go inside us. Why? So that we can come out of this series saying, I may not be there yet, but my sight is more Christ aligned than it was beforehand. Okay. Are you out there? Is everybody good? We still audio? We still video? Okay. I'm assuming you're there. In my nightmares, it's just that everybody has gone away. But here we go. Preachers are set on railing against LGBTQ people. And you say, this is old. Everybody's more accepting now. You apparently aren't on the same social media everybody else is on. And they often resort to falsely equating queerness with pedophilia. And that's a dangerous thing, and I need to talk about that. Here's another phrase that you got to get rid of regarding LGBTQ people. Well, I just love the sinner but hate the sin. God loves everybody. He loves the murderers. He loves the rapists. He loves the embezzlers, and he loves gay people too. That's I know we've been trained. We think that's being magnanimous, right? And maybe that is progress. I don't know, but it's certainly not. The knife is halfway out of my back, right? It's maybe we call it progress. Well, I used to be trained to hate them, but now I just say God loves them. And the people that beat animals just for their own pleasure, and the homosexual, God loves everybody. Who am I to judge? Well, that statement right there is kind of rhetorically violent. Now, I think we are right to be upset about pedophilia. I think that's right. I think it's that we all agree that we should agree that is wrong. And I would think we also agree that LGBTQ people certainly don't have the market on pedophilia, which is why sometimes you got to be careful when you say, well, yeah, you be careful with that LGBTQ because there's a lot of perverts, as the ones getting your kids. And I think that if we just look around, we'll find that it's not, that LGBTQ people, and I'm not saying there's not pedophilia among LGBTQ persons. I know, in fact, that there is. I've dealt with it in my pastoring with people that come in and have had those experiences. But I will tell you, far greater, I have dealt with the pedophilia in hetero relationships, right? LGBTQ people don't have a corner on the market of pedophilia, no more than they have a corner on the market of gender violence. And there is a lot of domestic violence in LGBTQ relationships. There are women who beat women in romantic relationships. There are men who beat men in their romantic relationships. But let's not pretend that LGBTQ people somehow have a corner on all domestic violence and romantic partnerships. That's a ridiculous assertion. But what happens is when somebody starts to assert for the full dignity and equality of LGBTQ persons, what is our temptation? Our temptation is to reduce it down to, yeah, but what about the children? Well, we agree with the children, but we agree about and that's why our statement of beliefs begins with the children and vulnerable persons must be protected at all costs. Here's all my thoughts on LGBTQ and straight and da-da-da. And it ends with children and vulnerable must be protected. We don't disagree there, but we have to be careful that when we talk about heterosex, and I say, well, God, heterosex and Eve and Adam and sexual Eden, and may you always be ravished with her breast and blah, blah, blah. We talk about that, and somebody says, well, I hear you talking about sex there, Pastor, and I hear you talking about marriage. Be careful you talk about pedophilia. We don't feel the compulsion to insert that, and that's something, guess what? That doesn't mean you're wrong to do that. That's a logical default. Why? Because of our conditioning and messaging that we receive, but we got to break out of that prejudice and go, well, that's ridiculous. Why do I feel the need to insert that context? And I'm not saying, I'm saying that not why do we feel that need? Because that's how we've been trained. I was talking to one of our precious members this past week, and you go to a picnic or a party or whatever, and you got all the family around, and over there is Cousin Harold, and Cousin Harold's friend, and say, well, Cousin Harold is gay, and there's certainly a mom there that when she's putting the suntan lotion on all the kids and rubbing them down and this night before they go jump in the pool, she whispers to him, now you stay away from Cousin Harold now and his friend, and it's interesting that she would feel that compulsion because that's what we've been conditioned. And stay away from Cousin Harold and his gay friend. Cousin Harold's gay. Stay away from them. Watch out for them. I got to watch Cousin Harold around the thing. But truthfully, let's just be honest. Uncle Fred is who you really got to watch out for at the family reunion, and everybody knows it, right? Everybody knows there. That's the family secret, is that Fred is a dangerous one. And I'm telling you, as somebody who has counseled and walked with families through lots of horrible things, it's always Uncle Fred. or Aunt Jolene or whatever it is. We irrationally, that's the word, we irrationally make the LGBT person the scapegoat for gender violence, for domestic violence, whatever. And it's kind of a sick thing that you'll see in the news, right? I mean, you'll see in the news, trans person shoots up a thing. Trans person goes and shoots the parents. Trans person. And yet on every other shooting, nobody inserts in there cis person, shoots his coworkers, cis person, gay person. Why? Because that's how that's the religious violence, the idea that, well, that's what God does is burn these people up anyway. So, and I actually had somebody tell me that. And he said, well, Pastor, you're just making up crazy stuff. I had somebody tell me that. We were having a church meeting one time, trying to discuss, we used to have what do they call it? Town hall. Every time we would have an election time and get people, we're discussing this tax thing, we're discussing this, and the subject of gay marriage was on the table. And they were talking about maybe passing a thing of domestic partnerships. Is that what they used to call them? Domestic? Whatever it was, something like that. Yeah, whatever. I forget what the old term was. And somebody said, well, what about health insurance? And a guy, a sweet, a gentle, a person who I love more than, he stood up and he said, well, Pastor, he said, I don't understand why we're talking about getting gay people health insurance. They're all going to burn in hell anyway. What difference does it make if they got health insurance? And that's coming from somebody who truly loves everybody, But we've been so conditioned with false religion, what majors on stuff that isn't really evil to distract us from things that are evil. We've talked about in the series, and we've got such common religious violence towards LGBTQ people. It's baked in the bread of who we are as Christians. The fact that anybody that does that should be killed by the community or should be killed by God to keep the evil out of the land. Which don't even get me started on that awful stuff. I mean, keep the evil out of the land. We got to protect the land. I go back to part one of our message here. But the thing about that is we're so used to that religious violence that the rhetorical violence is say, well, what difference does it make? They're all going to hell anyway. Who cares if they get a dental plan? How could you be so cold to have somebody going through cancer treatments and you want to try, well, they don't need health insurance. They're going to hell. Well, it's when your idea of God is false and when your religious idea supports violence towards a particular group of people, it's easy to get flippant and rhetorical with that violence. And here's the real secret, and I just pause this for a second. I didn't mean to turn this into a parenting series, but let me help you out here. Here's the real secret. When it comes to kids, parents need to watch out for everyone with their children. You're engaged in a fool's gamble if you tell your children, now watch out, there might be a trans person at Target, watch out for him. You think the trans person at Target is where the danger is? Well, I'm going to spend the night with Bill over there, my friend Billy, and we're going to go do this and do this. Wait a minute now, ain't Billy's gay uncle stay over there? You watch out for them. You think Billy's gay uncle is who needs to be watched out for? I'm going over with Sandra, and Sandra has two moms. You think Sandra's two moms are who your daughter needs to watch out for in this world? Well, you send her over to Jenny's house every week and don't even think about what's going on with Jenny's stepdaddy. Mhm. What did the great prophet Zimmerman say? Let us stop talking falsely. Let's not deal falsely. Let's not talk falsely. Children should be protected at all costs. And parents, my professional advice is watch everyone. Watch everyone. Educate them early. Educate them early with an environment that has no fear in it. Tell us anything, and we'll poker face. Mom, I'll poker face, Mom says. Dad says, I'll poker face, Mom says, so that you don't get freaked out by laying on us the truth by our reaction. Take it in. Oh, okay, wow. Well, what? And then what did they say? Oh, man, well, that had to be straight. Was that weird to hear that? Oh, wow. And who else was there? And they, okay, yeah. Why do you want to do that? You want to keep your kid talking. You want to keep that kid talking. You got to come up with ways to check how to go. And you got to go ahead of time. Now, listen, anybody ever just so you know that they can't do this and that's not a great way, and this and that, and nobody should be touching your privates, and nobody should be going into the bathroom with you, and nobody should be, you got to have that conversation, right? Conversations you got to have. And I hope you're not telling them, well, I don't need to have that conversation with my kid unless there are LGBTQ people around. Now, you've never lived that way. But guess what? What gets brought up in us when we start trying to carve out a larger dignity for people who have historically been objects of rhetorical, religious, and actual violence, what's the first thing that happens? Who whispers on our shoulder? Yeah, well, what about the children? But the children are always a priority. Okay, you know what I mean. And it is true that violence by hetero men against hetero women, right, is far more common than trans violence or anything else. Violence by homosexual men against homosexual men. Domestic violence in gay partnerships is a real thing. I have people, precious people who I know, precious people who I love, who have been physically abused by partners. Women, we know, but well, I'm worried about trans and what all they're going to do to us and all that kind of stuff. And that is, what is that? That is messaging out of chaos conditioning, trying to provoke you, trying to stir you up over an imaginary evil while you close your eyes to what's actually happening with the heterosexual coach or the heterosexual volleyball teacher. You're not even thinking about that because you're so worked up over what some trans person might do to somebody. And this is what false religion does. Well, you trying to say I shouldn't be on guard? I'm trying to say you should be on guard 365 and 360 degrees, 24/7, 365 and a quarter days, up, down, left, right, front, back, side to side. That's where your vigilance should be, and that you got to look in yourself and you say, well, I'm really vigilant over here. You are not paying attention to the actual world. And we are right to be concerned. Hear this. We are right to be concerned about grooming. We are right to be concerned about that. We are right to be concerned about early sexualization. We are right to be concerned with that. And no, I don't believe 6-year-olds should be told, well, now this is where this is where some people put it here and some people stay. That's not my children. Connie and I were always open and honest with our kids, and we always talk to them at an appropriate level, and we always use that language. And maybe kind of now we need to do a thing on how to talk to your kids or something like that. Maybe we need to get into that. And I'm being careful now because there are kids, that are driving in the back of the car listening. I got to be careful of that. There's a time and a place for that. And I don't believe that 6-year-olds. When our children, my daughter came home with a card from youth and said, hey, parents, just said FYI, next week in 7th grade, we're going to be talking about, and they just listed all the terms off that. And I sat the kids down and they were there, and Mikey was 10 or whatever. Olivia was going on 13. I said, do you know what these things are? I think I know what this one is, and I think I know it. Well, let's talk about it. And I said, well, this is this when it feels good to touch our private sometimes, and that's something done in private, and it's something that we don't want to do in a predatory manner, but that's what that is. And sometimes when 2 girls do this, and sometimes, and this and that, and there are people out here, now we may see the world this way, that we might not believe something should be out of marriage, but other people say, and you just lay it out there. And I think my kids were stunned. But guess what? I promise I will never lie to you. You're never going to go out into the world and find out something. My dad lied to me about that. He didn't tell me the truth. Number 2, I will never empower fear in your life. I'll never paint yourself or someone else as a boogeyman of evil in this. I'm always going to be on the side of dignity. So, but that doesn't mean that I think that should be popped on people at 7th grade or 7 years old or whatever. But just like I would say, I don't think there should be early sexualization by pushing it out on children, which I totally disagree with. I also think we have to be mindful of and open to the harmful effects of a society and cultural exclusion from representation. That people who grow up thinking differently never see themselves in any books or any stories or any conversations. Parents, children who come from parents, or they have an uncle, or they have a grandfather, they have a father, they have an aunt, they have a sister, they have a cousin who LGBTQ, and when they go to school, it's never even brought up. So we don't want to early sexualize children, but we also got to be mindful of what it must be like that you never see yourself anywhere, or anybody that looks like your parent, or anybody that looks like your cousin or your brother. It's not an easy, well, I don't mind, I'm not trying to exclude it, I just can't stand that they rub it in our faces. It's just like they all just want to rub it in our faces. Well, that's not true at all. Rub it in our faces. I'm quite sure that's how our grands, right? Or our parents, they likely felt the same thing about women, right? When women got the vote and when women could come into the workplace and I don't have a problem with them. I just don't feel like they need to rub it in our face. People of color, okay, fine, they can do this and that, but black and proud. What black and proud? Just be black, da-da-da. Well, a couple of years ago, they were arguing to be seen as human. And now that I'll call you human, but don't act like it's a big deal. You want to deprive me and create this huge vacuum over centuries of my non-personhood, and then as soon as somebody pries it literally out of your cold, dead hands, then you want to begrudge me standing boldly in that personhood? What type of chaos, darkness is operating there? Well, they're just throwing in our faces with now all this woke stuff they're throwing in our faces. You got the gays on everywhere and the trans on everywhere. My God, you can't even watch a soap commercial without somebody of color or BIPOC and somebody over here. And why can't it, whatever happened to just black couples and white? Now they got to mix it all up. And it's boring, so pass it, oh my gosh, put it in our face. Well, that's fine. That's fine. Someone said, well, I just don't understand in the last 4 years, doesn't seem like every commercial, every TV, they always got to put gay character. They got to have trans character. They got to have interracial. Why has it got it? Well, you don't understand over the past 4 years? You don't understand? Are you really saying that to yourself? You don't understand? Well, how long have black people existed? How long have mixed race couples existed, right? How long have LGBTQ people existed? Well, better question, how long has TV been a thing? How many thousands of shows? How many hundreds of thousands, millions of commercials have aired? Pop, when was TV a thing? You got a color television? You saw it first? How old were you? 1960, but TV, black and white, were you? 52. Okay, so we've had about 70 years now. We've had television. Out of 70 years, I don't understand why every time I turn on a commercial. I'll tell you why. Because it's not like there were no LGBTQ or black people or people of color. It's not like they didn't exist for the past 70 years. It's just that they could not, they were around, but they couldn't be themselves. Think of Rock Hudson, right? Oh, he's so dreamy. He's so dreamy. He couldn't live as his full self. Why? Because since television has been a thing, since television commercials have been a thing, it just could not be. Well, I just don't have to rub it in our faces. Nobody's rubbing it in anybody's faces. We're finally in an age of acknowledgement. Maybe we pendulum over to a place of over acknowledgement. But that's the same thing they said about when black people started getting. Well, that seems like every show they'd make it now got a black person on the thing. It's like there was no black people on television. Just a couple, and now every show starring somebody black, now black people being pushed on us out of nowhere from every direction. But our parents grew up where there were different bathrooms, right? Different counters. My parents were born before civil rights. I was born after. I'm the first generation born after civil rights, but I was raised by people who were born before civil rights and were living in Jim Crow. That's who I was raised for, and we act like it's being pushed out of nowhere. And while we're all upset about it, I just don't understand why it's being pushed out of nowhere. Why it's black this and black month and black this. I'll tell you what, here's the truth of the matter. Your daddy probably marched and protested and voted against civil rights to begin with. No, not my daddy, not my daddy. He didn't do that. Well, did he march for it? Did he get out there and say, this is wrong and I need to be part of what's right? Or did he just say, well, I was never for it. I just don't like it being pushed in my face. See, we never have anything to say while it's the oppression. But once that dignity starts coming out, we don't understand why it has to be like that. And I'll tell you why. Because we've been conditioned by false religion. This is what false religion does. Okay. Last couple minutes. I hope you're out there. Somebody said, why are you so angry? I'm not angry. I've lived in that darkness. I am a child of that darkness. And I'm pushing back on it inside myself and hopefully pushing back on it in a couple of you. Let's close with this idea. I'm going to give you something now, and I hope you can handle it. I've got just a few minutes. I'm going to give you a startling assertion as it relates to the foundation of the Christ-honoring sexual ethic, which is what we said. Dignity, right? The Christ ethic doesn't require straightness. The Christ sexual ethic does not require straightness. It does not require a cessation of queerness. It doesn't require it at all. The Christ sexual ethic requires two things: dignity for self and others, and it requires consent. And this consent must be qualified consent, not merely manufactured by the chaos of this world, but conditioned by the dignity of Christ. And we've been talking about that. So I'm going to give you a maxim, and it's going to be very useful. It speaks to the heart of this practice of true religion, especially as it relates to sex and sexual expression. I'm going to give you this maxim, but I must warn you, I'm giving you like a super Cutco knife, right? Like a Ginsu knife. It'll cut a tin can and still be sharp enough to slice a tomato like this. I'm giving you something that is very powerful because it's dangerous. And I'm going to put it in your hand, but I want to do that, and I want to give it to you with a preamble and a warning of this. It's very powerful, and it must be treated mindfully. It deserves conscientiousness, and it deserves respect. So here is the maxim that I want you to consider as it relates. And just before you say, no, you're crazy, you're the devil, you look like an angel, you walk like an angel, you talk like an angel, but I got eyes. Before you tell me that, I just want you to sit for just a second and let this sizzle for a minute. Just let this simmer in your spirit for a minute. I'm giving you a Christ ethic, but I told you it's dangerous. You go whipping it around, you're going to hurt yourself and hurt somebody else. Here it is. Here's what we're trying to get to as it relates to sexual expression, LGBTQ, hetero, etc. Here's what we're trying to get to. Here it is. Here's your new maxim. I want you to pause and consider. Selah. Think about this. Here it is. If it feels good, do it. If it feels good, do it. That is at the core of the Christ ethic. If it feels good, do it. Someone say, well, that seems counterintuitive to me. I understand that. But when it comes to this particular issue, the church is so dogmatically impacted, and I use impacted in a bowel sense, dogmatically impacted, that it can take this type of thought to break up the sludge in our patterns of thinking. When it comes to engaging in expressing ourselves as sexual beings, I want you to think of this. If it feels good, do it. Someone say, my God, that's dangerous. I told you it's a powerful tool. It's very sharp. You can't just use it haphazardly. It can be a tool, or it can destroy. Only a person whose soul is anchored in God, or anchored in love, or anchored in any other placeholder for love. For us, it's the personalized placeholder of Christ. Only a soul who is anchored in God can engage with this idea ethically, honestly, this ethic honestly and meaningfully. That when I say when it comes to your sex and sexual expression, if it feels good, do it. It takes a heart touched by Christ in order to say, okay, wow, I see how holy and how pure and how beautiful and how powerful that is. But it takes a heart touched by love, touched by God. For us, touched by the personification of Christ. This tool that I'm saying, if it feels good, do it, demands humility. It demands introspection. Catch it in your notes. This tool deserves humility. It deserves introspection. If you're going to live by if it feels good, do it in a Christ-anchored way, you're going to have humility. You're going to have introspection. You have to look inside yourself. You're going to have contemplation. You're going to have to sit with it a little bit and just meditate on it. You're going to have self-honesty. Humility, introspection, contemplation, self-honesty. Here's what else you're going to need. If I'm going to give you this tool, if it feels good, do it. Someone say, I'm really torn about my self-concept and my self-expression, and you're telling me that it's dignity and qualified consent, and you say, that doesn't make sense. Help me touch it, right? I want to get close to it, and I'm telling you, if it feels good, do it. It takes humility, introspection, contemplation, self-honesty. It takes others-sightedness. If it feels good, do it is not a very good maxim if you don't have others, if your Christ-anchored heart is not always other-sided. And it requires humility, introspection, contemplation, self-honesty, other-sidedness, and it requires action that is tethered to empathy. That when I act, I'm always thinking of the feelings of the other. Now, here we go. Because whoever hears the phrase, if it feels good, do it. Any person whose heart has been open to God, open to love, open to Christ, open to grace, by whatever name called, when they hear that, they surely hear the phrase, if it feels good, do it, as just another way of saying, love your neighbor as you love yourself. If you have a heart not anchored in God, right? If you have a heart, if your soul is so conditioned by chaos that your smaller self is leading your larger self, you hear, if it feels good, do it, and think in a predatory way. But if your larger self as your smaller self has been supplanted by your larger self, your image-seated self leads the filtering of that. And when you hear, if it feels good, do it, it comes out of my mouth. If it feels good, do it. It comes into your ears. Love others as you love yourself. This is what I mean, and I intend when I invoke dignity. I invoke dignity as the baseline of the Christ sexual ethic and as the ultimate aim. And you can't have dignity as the baseline and the aim if you don't have consent that's playing an unending, continual, but ever-shifting role. I mean, this is the dignity and consent coming together. If it feels good, do it. And you need to contemplate on what that means. And it's hard for us to hear about dignity. Well, I've been told that anything homo is debasing. How could that possibly be dignity? And that's why I'm saying I'm trying to get you out of your religious filter. You've got to encounter it in the natural first. Jeez, golly, I wish I had time. Think of Christ, right? Christ kept trying to break them out. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. How many times did they say, yeah, but the book tells us this, and the book tells us this, and you can see Jesus standing there going, how do I explain this? How do I explain this? Okay. I know the book tells you this person should be punished for carrying their book, their bed on the Sabbath day. He said, but let me ask you this. Forget the book for a second. Let me just ask you what you know to be true naturally. What do you know to be true naturally? That if it was your dog that was in trouble, you would help him, right? And they go, well, yeah, we understand. He said, think of what you know naturally, and now from what you know to be true naturally, see if you can gain an idea into the inside. He would talk about, God. God is love and God is merciful, and you're always trying to exclude the sinners, and you're always trying to say who's going to hell and who's in, who's out. And Jesus said, let me ask you this. He said, you're a parent. Think of the mercy you have for your own child. You don't think God has much more mercy for the world than that? What was he doing? He was not trying to explain God to them. He tried to connect with them on the earthly. He says, look in your own heart as a parent. Do you understand that love? Yeah. Now multiply it by infinity and take it to the depths of forever, and you might have a little inkling of how big God's love is. He's trying to work from the natural to the spiritual, and I'm trying to work you from the natural to the spiritual. If you can't get to dignity, to the idea of dignity and consent through the inherited religious weaponization, maybe you can get to it by stepping out of this. Let me step out of the weaponization and just say this. If it feels good, do it. Now, what does that mean? Here's the question. If it feels good, do it. Let's rattle them off real quick. First of all, if it feels good, do it for me and the other. Not just if it feels good for me, does it feel good? Now say, oh, you thought you were talking about LGBTQ. Listen, now we're talking about hetero relationships as well. The Christ sexual ethic is true for hetero and queer persons. That you can. It's not that when I finally do it God's way, I'll arrive at straight, married, and monogamous. Not true. When you finally do it God's way, you will arrive at dignity and consent. And the pathway to get there say, if it feels good, then I will do it. But feels good for what? For who? For me and for the other. And what I mean by the other is not just the persons involved in the romantic sexual relationship. I mean all interested, all related persons. Well, I got a lady on my job, and it feels good to her, and I'm married, and it feels good to me. What about my wife? Well, I don't think it feels good to her. Now, all of a sudden, we're having a conversation about an ethic. Does it feel good for you and the other? all related others, all invested others. Secondly, if it feels good in the during and the after. You know, there are some things that in the during, they feel very good. The after doesn't leave us feeling so good. So you say, well, I do X, Y, and Z, and then after I feel terrible. Well, then I would stop, and instead of trying to say, what does God think? What is the scripture? What is my pastor? What is this? I would stop and say, if it feels good, do it. And if what feels good in the during does not feel good in the after, that's something I would take and have and sit before the Lord. As a matter of fact, I would disengage from that practice and sit here and say, why does this feel good during and not after? Does it feel good? If it feels good, do it in the inner and the outer life. It might feel good to our outer self. Does it feel good to our inner self? And please, I know it's tempting to hear this and say, all right, now you're getting the gays, Pastor. Now you're telling them because they know it's not right. They know that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm talking to hetero people who engage in things, and the next day they go, why do I do this? It leaves me so empty. I'm talking about persons, not particular persons. Sometimes when we're younger, things felt bad. That later on we say, it's really not that big of a deal. I was really hung up. Sometimes when we're younger, we think this is great. And then we got older and say, that really didn't do me a lot of good. I'm saying that the Christ sexual ethic is not something I can give you and say, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. I'm saying I can seat you in it. If it feels good, do it. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto yourself. Pursue dignity and qualified, conditioned, larger self-consent. That is what I can put you to aim towards. But you've got to evaluate it on each phrase. Does it feel good to me and other people? Is it good for them? Is it good for self and the other? Is it good for all involved parties? Is it good in the during and the after? Is it good in the inner and the outer life? Is it good in the short term and in the long? You know, Pastor, I've just been meeting people online, and we just go meet up, and we do this, and it's been a great party. And I say, yeah, okay, that's fine. But the Christ ethics does not say, it's feeling good right now. The Christ ethic asks you to stop and say, what is the long-term outworking of this? And those long-term outworkings are not immediately apparent. Drugs are one of those things that feel real good on the front end, and they pay the price on the back end. Exercise is one of those things that feels real terrible on the front end, but it yields great promise on the back end, which is why we should allow hindsight to become our foresight. I'm not saying cast out all tradition. I'm saying factor in what tradition says, but factor in what tradition says, not in the weaponized religious context, but factor in what tradition says in the context of the person of Christ. Jeez, I got to stop. I don't want to stop, but I don't want to rush. Here's the thing. Well, tradition already tells us it should be in marriage and only with man and woman, and everything else is bad. Well, where did you get that from? It's right here, man. It's been worked out over thousands of years. Yeah, intermarriage is also forbidden in here, right? Tradition said intermarriage is bad. Interfaith, intertribal, interracial is bad. Tradition said, I don't care if there's abuse going on inside the house, you never get divorced. We got that from tradition too. Tradition told us, as a matter of fact, you have no obligation in divorce. If you're tired of your woman, give her a writing of divorcement and send her on her way. Tradition taught us that too. Tradition taught us that in hetero marriage, that consent was no longer the standard, that once you were married, consent was not a factor. We got all of that from tradition. We got all of the things about beating children. We got all of the things about beating wives and not leaving marks and the rule of thumb and all these other kind of things. We get these from tradition. But just because we got it from tradition, tradition gives us a vote, but tradition does not get to control us, our ethic, from beyond the grave. We resist the tyranny I think about the American Revolution. It was important that our framers decided to resist tyranny from across the pond. It's important for us to decide we're going to resist tyranny from across time and space. We should consult tradition, and as we work out what we think and the ongoing evolution of the perspective of Christ, we should work out what we think. But we also see where we have shed a lot of things in tradition. You know, growing up in the old church, you just didn't get divorced. It don't matter what he did. It don't matter what she did. It don't matter how he hurt you. It don't matter how he's beating the kids. God hates divorce, and that was a tradition. Thank God we see Christ larger now. And I'm just making the argument for perhaps if it feels good, do it, should be another way to say if you love your neighbors, you love yourself. Why? Because maybe we can evaluate, does this feel good for me and others, what I'm involved in? Well, tradition says it doesn't matter if it feels good, if he beats you, if he wants to touch you, you're his wife and you got to give him sex. You're her husband, you got to do this. Well, wait a minute. I know what tradition says, but this doesn't feel good to me and the other parties. It doesn't feel good in the short term and the long. It doesn't feel good in the during and the after. It doesn't feel good in the inner and the outer life. That seems to me to be a more Christ-consistent exploration rather than these are the right ways and these are the wrong people. These are the people God's going to burn up in fire and these are the people that God is going to bless. There's got to be a higher way to consider the questions before us. And that's all the time we have. I thank you for your support. We're coming up on the close of 2 months. Ask yourself, my God, the church has been around 2 months. I've been loving it. Have you supported? Have you created value by showing your support? All these messages have blessed me. Well, that's only in your head. We don't even know you exist. But as we close out this second month, you need to sit down and say, wow, man, I can't believe June's almost over. Did you get any value out of the messages in June? Oh, yeah. You create value by showing your support. The other thing is, well, what about all my other time and my offerings and take all that and be blessing to humanity? Find the stranger, invest. Well, I want a write-off. Take all that tithes, offerings, building funds, put it in the charity, get you all the write-offs you want. Find something that is actively alleviating suffering, human trafficking or feeding or justice work, anything that's going to eliminate, alleviate, prevent suffering. You go out and get all the tax write-offs you want. You do that. Or you go find individuals or there's no tax write-off. Or you find a family to bless in secret and give them $5,000 that you would ignore. Well, I just closed out my quarter. I got my quarterly bonus for June here and it's pretty fat. And normally I'd give that to the church. What do you want me to do with it now, Mike? I tell you what I want you to do with it. I want you to show value and say, oh yeah, I got to make sure this teaching is changing my life. I can never forget that I just can't show up and just eat and never say thank you for what's happening. It's changing my life. I've got to communicate how much I value it through my support. But what are you going to do with this? Take all the rest of it and say, man, what family can I help? How can you sneak money into a family that just lost all their stuff? I won't get a write-off for that. If you have to have a write-off, how can you give to the Red Cross? I'm telling you, go out and impact the world. That we're not in a place where we want all of your resources, charity, energy, and giving to be consumed by the institution. We want all of that religious energy directed to directly impacting lives. That's what you're doing. That's what this church is about. That's what the church of is all about. And I thank you for not only your support of us, the value you create, but I thank you for going out and making an impact. And when they say to you, I told you I was online having a session the other day, and a lady walked by, we were doing a video chat, and she said, oh, come here, you got to meet my pastor. I love that because we're your pastors. We pray for you, we cover you, we lift you, we love you, we feed you, and we send you out into the mission field, not to go out and get people converted to our side, but to go out and be Jesus, the ongoing embodiment of Jesus. Guess what? Carol and Fred and John and Tom and Tim and Malik, everybody else, guess what? You're going out there, and what are you doing? You're going out and you're doing good and easing and comforting and healing and contending for all who have been harassed by the chaos of this world. You are blessed. Health, peace, protection, preservation, soundness, abundance, joy upon each one. I bless you in the name of Jesus. Amen. God bless you. Make it a great week. I'll see you. Wow, our final message for June coming up. And I pray you have a glorious week. Connie and I love you so, so much. Be blessed. Gotta go.